When Eddie was a teenager, Eric Clapton was his biggest influence. He had Clapton's posters on the wall and copied his solos note for note. When Van Halen achieved huge success, Eddie met his guitar hero Eric Clapton a few times. When they first met, Eddie said, "Thank you very much for your music, it was a big influence on me." They hung out, drank a few beers, and had a good time. This positive relationship wouldn't last though. Enter Brian May. In 1983, Brian May and Eddie collaborated on a project. Starfleet Project, to be precise, a mini album spearheaded by the Queen guitarist who invited Eddie Van Halen to join in. And join in he did! Inspired by the theme tune to the children's science fiction TV show Starfleet, known outside the UK as X-Bomber, May decided to revamp the music. He added 2 more tracks, including a double lead jam titled Blues Breaker. The result was released on October 31st, 1983, tagged Dedicated to EC, and Brian May loved the process of recording this album. He said this, "I think we'd all got to the point where we'd worked hard in the studio with our respective bands and it had almost become a job," May said in 2020. "But this was different, we're all friends and whatever happens here is a bonus, so it was full of joy." He continued, "And there was no pressure, but boy was there adrenaline. It was just so exhilarating, like setting off down a big ski slope at 100 miles an hour. It was an amazing feeling. I looked around and just smiled and smiled." Now you might think Eric Clapton would have been thrilled about this. Wow, 2 of the world's leading guitarists have recorded a track and dedicated it to little old me. But no, he was far from appreciative. And here's why. Eric Clapton explained in a 1986 interview with Musician magazine, "One side was kind of a fusion thing, really very interesting, great to listen to. The other side was a blues jam. It was so horrible and they dedicated it to me. They sent me a copy, I put it on expecting something, and I was almost insulted that they should send this to me because they both can't play. They took turns to play solos and it just went at it with everything they knew. There are no dynamics, no build-up, no sensitivity. I was very disappointed." In terms of those solos, Brian May responded with this, "When we were trading solos, we were feeding off each other. We'd never played together before, and yet the chemistry is there. It was as spontaneous as anything could be." Now, Eric's criticism was harsh, yes, but also understandable, I think. Because, to be fair, you would expect much more from guitarists like Eddie Van Halen and Brian May, especially with something they've dedicated to Eric Clapton. But it does really sound like the two just pressed record, bashed out whatever they could on the guitar, and then called it a day. And actually, the reason it sounds like that is because, well, that's pretty much exactly what happened. Eddie Van Halen explained that that was precisely the intention. Rather than a meticulously crafted song, it was a raw expression of music, with 2 guitars jamming in homage to the genre that deeply influenced them. Therefore, dedicating the song to an artist who inspired them so profoundly felt entirely fitting. "That was just a get-together jam," Van Halen said. "They invited me down. After we played, Brian called me up about 4 months later and asked if I thought about putting the stuff out. I said, 'Send me the tape, let me hear it first because I don't remember how it went.' He did, and I said, 'Sure, what the hell, it reeks of fun.'" Brian May was also very defensive about this jam. He told Guitar World in 2020, "When we started the Blues Breaker track, I think we kind of had Eric Clapton in our minds, and the people that Clapton would revere, like B.B. King and Muddy Waters. It was the power of the blues which made us gel. I remember Edwards saying, 'You know, you got me to play today in a way I haven't played for years, just simple and from the heart. Wouldn't you know that kind of feeling?'" Clapton rebuked Van Halen for seemingly misinterpreting his influence, particularly in how he honored the blues legends who came before him, emphasizing that he never sought credit for pioneering the concepts he played. "If he was that tuned into me and missed the point, then he missed the whole point," Clapton said. "It's crazy for him to have learned that much from me. I mean, he could have just been aware of what I was doing and then said, 'Oh yeah, well that's a bit like Buddy Guy,' or 'that's a bit like so-and-so.' Put it all in perspective. To get obsessive about one person." Clapton even suggested that Van Halen should seek inspiration from someone else. "He should check Buddy Guy out," Clapton said to Classic Rock. To illustrate that, I did a tour a couple of years ago where we'd been on the road for about a month and it was getting slightly stale. We dropped into Chicago and I went down to see Guy at the checkerboard. We got up and played and I came to life again. It was like being with Muddy Waters for half an hour. The whole thing was revitalized, Clapton said. When Eddie heard that Clapton had heavily criticized their joyful jam, well, he was very upset. After Clapton's criticism, the two did bump into each other in New York at a party. Now, at this party, Eddie was very, very drunk. Eric Clapton was newly sober. This caused the two to clash, and Eddie reportedly said the words, "Forget that teabag." I mean, that is a powerful, powerful insult. After being dismissed by Clapton like that, Eddie hit back, stating he wasn't a big fan of Clapton's music after Cream. He said, "Actually, after Cream, I dug back a little bit to the Blues Breakers stuff, but my favorite was when he was in Cream. Which is only a couple of years, it wasn't a long run. But what I really liked was their live stuff like Wheels of Fire and Goodbye Cream, because then you could really hear three guys playing in their live element." He doubled down on this newfound criticism of Clapton when he went to see him live with Derek and the Dominos. He told Guitar World, "To be honest with you, I was expecting something more powerful. If I would have seen Cream, I probably would have been more blown away, because that's the era of Clapton that I really love. The show was more of a Doobie Brothers kind of thing." In another interview, Van Halen said he was most into Clapton during his cocaine and hair era, which is how he put it. He said in this interview that he and his first guitar teacher agreed that after rehab treatment, Clapton's music was less inspiring, referring to stuff like "I Shot the Sheriff" and "Lay Down Sally." That's when his music was best, says Eddie. White Room, Sunshine, etc. Despite these later differences, Van Halen maintained that it was Eric Clapton who inspired him the most in his early musical career. "Being limited gear-wise forced me to find my own voice on the guitar. That's why Eric Clapton's live jams with Cream were such an influence on me back in '68. He was pretty much just using natural distortion on those live tracks on Wheels of Fire and Goodbye. I had no money and couldn't afford a fuzzbox or wah-wah or ring modulator or whatever Hendrix had in his rig. I just plugged straight into an amp and turned it up to 11. So to get a different or unique sound, I had to squeeze it out with the strings with just my fingers." As for Brian May, in 2021 he reflected on the philosophical differences between him and Eric Clapton. "I love Eric Clapton, he's my hero, but he has very different views from me in many ways," the Queen icon said. "He's a person who thinks it's okay to shoot animals for fun, so we have our disagreements, but I would never stop respecting the man." As it turns out, Eddie Van Halen isn't the only legendary guitarist that Eric Clapton would form a rivalry with. In fact, he had a rivalry with one of his best friends, Jeff Beck. They called it an uncomfortable rivalry. I've made a video about this as well, you can click here to watch that one next.